And we're gonna have a great guest. Our main topic today is to be, how do you handle interviews? How do you prepare for interviews? How do you uh, like be interviewed? How do you just all of that, just about interviewing. How do you, and because it's important for startups that are that are having to build teams. They need to be involved in the interview process initially. But then also, some of you out there might be looking for new jobs now. So you need to be top of your game on your interviews. But at some point, anytime an entrepreneur is raising capital, or they're getting ready to go public, or they're getting ready to do any of those kind of things, they're going to be interviewed by media. And so you have to be able to do that, handle that, and handling questions. One of the things that's a challenge a lot of times when companies are doing pitches to investors, they I used to use this thing used to happen all the time when I was with at IBM, was that you had to repeat the question back to them so that you made sure you understood the question, and it gave you a second to like prepare your answer when you said, is that what you're asking? Right? Because sometimes entrepreneurs, I notice, and I coach them, they'll answer a question. We go through a drill of what is the um I'm sorry, I just got distracted. I got a little noise going. What is the they don't even answer the question, right? They go off on a tangent, and I have to, because we do dry run. Well, here's a like question from an investor, and you anticipate these kind of questions, and they'll go off on a tangent, and I was like, and even when I'm talking to people, I was talking to a guy today that was trying to tell me about all the good stuff he's doing with his company, and I was asking him a very specific question about his offering, because he was saying things like, well, it might be this, or well, it might be doing that. And I said, well, a confused investor is not going to invest if you don't know very clearly how you're raising the capital and what you're asking for. They're just going to go, oh, that's really interesting, thanks, and you'll think they're really engaged and interested, and they're not. They're just being polite because they're so confused by what you just said. So, with that, let me introduce my guest, Kim Chandler McDonald, and we're also live stream, so you never know exactly what's going to happen. When I did my live stream, now I know not to click the button at the bottom. I thought I was marking, and I ended up stopping the one the other day, and so it's like it's two interviews. So anyway, this one we're back in here now. We're going to get this going. I'm going to give you so. I'm trying to scroll down through my. Sorry, I have. Here we go. There we go. There we go. Okay, we're good. Yay. Okay, Kim is joining me from Sydney, Australia, where it is bright and early there. She is the co-founder and CEO of Three Steps Data and Flat World Integration. She is on a mission to make digital world more secure, more innovative, and more importantly, more human. Flat World Integration pioneered the zero trust, data focused flat world operating system, the very foundation of Three Steps Data with DMAAS. And this is going to be a new thing for a lot of people, but that's data management as a service. You know SaaS? Well, DMAAS, DMAS, I guess, is data management as a service. And that's driving data and digital governance solutions. And when we were chatting just before, she clarified for me, because and she'll talk about this, I'm sure, because we're going to get into it. But EU, the EU views personal data very differently than we do in the U.S. It's coming here, but they're way ahead of us. So she also is a board member of the and of she's a board member of and the global vice president of Cybersecurity Advisors Network, CN, which is located in Paris, as a multidisciplinary international trust network of cyber professionals. In that role, she drives strategic growth, community engagement, and leads the Combating Technology Facilitated Abuse and Violence Initiative. That sounds like cyberbullying. So, but she'll explain that more in a minute. And but the main thing that we're going to talk about is this interviewing thing, because Kim is an award-winning author, storyteller, And her book is the interviewer's guidebook to turning conversations into captivating stories. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about one of the key things about messaging. And the guy that had been the advisor to Tony Blair, is that in order to get a key message out, you wrap a story around it instead of just a word. Like three words together doesn't mean as much as if you tell a story that comes down to meaning those three words. And that was really, that was, it's profound in whether you're selling your business, talking about your value proposition, or a politician. All right, so, and you're going to get a special gift today. If you go, when you go to the link that's in the show notes, you can see some of the templates that she includes as part of her book. Besides that, she is a prolific writer. Her other titles are Innovation: How Innovators Think, Act, and Change Our World, Flat World Navigation: Collaboration and Networking in the Global Digital Economy, and Postcards from Tomorrow, which the proceeds go to a place in Sydney, Lewis Place, that's a daytime drop-in center for female victims of domestic abuse and coercive control. She's also the co-author of Entrepreneurial Renaissance: Cities Striving Towards an Era of Renaissance and Revival. I mean, I think you are a Renaissance woman. Kim, welcome to the Compassionate Capitalist Show.
Thank you, Karen. You know what? I would be that person that when somebody you come into a dinner party and you think, oh, for goodness sakes, we're already through the appies and she's still introducing herself with this woman. I mean, Lord. Yeah, but you know what? I do. I wear, even with this hair, I wear a lot of hats. And I would suggest that there's a through thread, if you will, through all of those things. So you're right. I'm the co-founder of Three Steps Data. I'm the global VP of it's Cyan, and of course an author. But I would say that the through thread is a real core of activism and also communication. I'm fascinated by the power of conversation, whether that's in business, cybersecurity, or storytelling. And I suppose that the interviewer's guidebook is kind of a culmination of that. And that came from years of interviewing many, many hundreds of fascinating people, be that, a John Irving, a Tom Wolfe, a Madeleine Albright, an F.W. de Klerk, fascinating people, and realizing that strong communication, knowing how to ask the right questions, listen actively, and engage meaningfully is a skill that every leader, every founder, and professional needs. And part of that, if you will, is compassion, listening with empathy and actively listening is a I believe is a sign and a reflection of a compassionate person. So whether you're hiring or pitching or leading a team, every conversation is it's an opportunity to influence, to connect, and to build something bigger than yourself. And just to that, I will just say that I really liked within your opening, gosh, many paragraphs, because let's face it, there was a lot to get through. But when you talked about repeating back the question, that is so important. I'll just say I can really hear an echo, Karen. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of it. Repeating back the question is, I think it has always been important, but particularly now when we are in what is essentially an exponentially increasingly global digital economy, where you never know really the comfortable language of the person that you're speaking to. It may be that you think that they understand your vernacular or your slang or your idioms, things that you take as just a given that everybody knows what I mean by X and X, but they don't. They don't necessarily. So ensuring that your audience understands what you're saying and also you understand what they're saying by repeating back. Let me just essentially, let me make sure that I understand you correctly.
Right.
dot is really powerful. So that was a really great point to make. And shall I also just say thank you so much for having me? I don't think I said that.
It's fine.
I've been really looking forward to this chat for a while. So thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, we've been bouncing around getting this done for a minute, haven't we? So, um,
We have.
oh, so, so how did you? Because so explain how you started your firm, and the focus of it was, I guess, initially on or all together. Is it all just on how you own your own personal data?
Wow. So it's a journey, and my career path is convoluted at best. So I started out in theater, then I went to into media, which is where I was arts and culture editor for a number of newspapers and magazines when I lived in the Netherlands, had a radio show. All of those things tied in very much with my love of communication and also to a certain extent activism. And then I went for brunch one day, and this gorgeous man walked in, and who's now my husband, and we eventually became partners both personally and professionally. But what we wanted to do was find a problem that needed to be solved that both of our points of passion and capabilities would address. Michael, the code whisperer, if you will, of the family, brought big tech and major computer science, pardon me, to the table. I brought a sense of urgency, strategy, and as I say, activism. And what the problem we looked at was essentially around data. And we were very fortunate, I think, because when we started talking about this and knocking things out on a whiteboard, we were in the EU. And so already within the EU, you are very used to, for instance, the idea of multi-jurisdictional data sharing and the frictions around that, be the frictions technical, but they can be legal, they could be regulatory. There are all sorts of things that get in the way of the smooth sharing of data in a way that is controlled and secure. But when we were beginning this conversation, what was very clear was that the solutions that were available were really only available to the top 1%. They were the Oracles, the SAPs, the Salesforces. And that's great if you're part of the 1% who can afford those kinds of solutions. But generally speaking, the 99.9% of us who aren't there really weren't serviced. So we set out to, our phrase was always tier one technology at tier none cost and capability level. Frankly, most people's IT department is a guy called Nigel who lives in his mom's basement and set up their email system, right? Like nobody's got a team. Nobody's got the time certainly nobody's reading a manual to figure out anything. So our whole thing was creating a solution that was accessible, but also really driven by the understanding that your data is your data. Your data is your digital asset, and you have the right to own it and control it. So that's really where 3-Steps data came from, was it had to be something where it allowed the data owner, you, to securely share, control, and monitor your data in a way that was extremely simple, thus the 3 steps, but also affordable in time and money. Because, who's got time to read a manual? If I have to go through a couple of slides, I glaze over quickly. I'm really the bottom line of the company. If I'm bored, it goes back. So that's where 3-Steps data comes from, and the concept of data ownership. And I will say this about the US, much like geopolitically, it is fractured as much as any other area in the world. So there are certain states that have different legislation and governance requirements around data. There are some that have very little. It is a very fluid thing right now. the the world we are living in is changing very quickly, and cybersecurity is doing its best to keep up. But when you think about the fact that essentially the people who are trying to get at your data are using tools, for instance, certain types of AI are in that they are able to change how they're attacking every single day. They are using different algorithms every single day. And so the people who are trying to protect you have always been somewhat on the back foot, but with I mean they're racing as fast as they can, but it's a near impossibility to stay ahead of that kind of aggressive attacks. So you have to be aware that you probably will be breached. What do you do when that happens? We could talk for hours about
Yeah.
cybersecurity, and we do at Cyan. So if any listeners are interested in cybersecurity, come and join us in Cyan. We have a very big house.
Okay. Yeah, that's the organization for cybersecurity professionals.
It is, but it's also, it began as a very, very siloed organization specifically for cybersecurity tech heads, if you will. And what we came to realize, specifically, I would say that started to change as I moved up the organization and brought my activism to the table. It also is really increasingly inviting people in risk and governance, in trust and safety, and really looking at it from the perspective that if we're not all safe, no one is safe. In a supply chain, it doesn't matter if the biggest fish is secure, if the plankton, the minnows, if everybody else is at risk. Just like any chain, the weakest link means everybody can be compromised. So it's for us, we have set out to really open the doors to anyone who is interested in creating a far safer digital world.
So let's okay, so I had we start talked about this a little bit earlier, and I, as an American citizen, I know we were just talking hypothetical and you don't know because you're not actually involved with any form of cybersecurity over here in our federal government. But there's been a lot of reports of breach of data, and breach of systems that were secure at one point in time when various people in Doge demanded access to data. And then we've also heard of, within the public facing content about grants or U.S. aid, or being able to get into like it's the USA, the USDA tracking bird flu and all the data around that. All of the stuff that's being done as part of the CDC. We have all of, lots of research being done, medical research, and storage of things that you don't want to have out there in the public, all of that stuff that when people were, I know personally from people that were let go, they had to pack up their personal belongings and walk out the door. And when they were invited back to be a rehire, their computers and their stuff weren't there. They weren't able to shut down and close things up. So as a U.S. citizen, if because you're talking best practices for stuff, and I figured out why it's doing that noise, but I can't change it now. Hopefully, when the final recording is, it'll like not have that static noise. But anyway, we're live. So the I don't want to stop it and start it back up because I don't have two recordings again. Um, so anyway, that it is, proper protocol for data is, like double backed up or something, right? So even though it may have been wiped from a local server or wiped from what we could see in the internet because they killed a page or something, odds are it's still safe someplace, because I just think about the decades, and the even the trillions of dollars of, of content and information that we have accumulated. The National Institute of Health, in their PubMed library, goes all the way back to 1910 or something, or before that, whenever, in Ellis Island, and immigrants were coming, and the first case of the flu, or it might have been the Spanish flu, I don't know, and all the data that they captured on people that was in paper form got scanned and put into the National Institute of Health. All the white papers, all of the research, the verified peer reviewed research that's been out there for, hundreds of years, is, that's all still safe someplace. It couldn't just get, like, simply dismissed and erased because there was somebody thought it cost too much to keep the data storage or something, right?
Right.
I hope.
I understand your question and your concern. I really do. I would love to be able to say you without any hesitation, of course, because who wouldn't, right? I mean, that is priceless information that, of course, one would think there was a copy somewhere that was sacrificed. Can I say to you without any hesitation that that is true? No, I cannot. And I say that because, again, there, much like I talked about the fact that um, there are hackers who are so far ahead with the tools that they're able to use that it's hard to know where they're going to go next. It's whack-a-mole time, essentially. Um, what is happening, and it's not just in the U.S., but what is happening in many geopolitical arenas is happening so fast, and there are certainly experts within the teams that are doing whatever they're doing that may not feel any compulsion to save important data. So I can't tell you that. I will say this, though. I just this morning found an article in Wired magazine. You can find it at wired.com. And it's essentially looking at what it's calling a digital coup. And it's looking at what it calls the infiltration of dozens of federal agencies, and the siphoning of millions of people's most sensitive data, which they're going to put AI on top of. It's an interesting read. If you want to dig into that subject, but I really I can't say, because I'm not in the middle of that.
Yeah, so let's just go hypothetical, like best practices of any government. That, like, people that might even work in other governments, in the EU or something, right? Where, you would think, because of the cybersecurity pieces, and the threat, the cyber attacks, we've seen it be used in wartime situations, that there would be a best practices, that they're backed up on tape someplace that's not actually on the internet, and every day somebody comes in, it's moved or something like that, and it's like, so I'm optimistic that powers that be set up a protocol a decade ago, or at least 5 years ago, that would, or 3 years ago, that would back all this, have a double redundancy backup kind of a thing,
Sure.
in such a way, in an archive someplace, that it can be restored.
Sure.
In,
And
in,
essentially a digital Fort Knox.
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And best practice is that you have a essentially a single source of the truth that is secure and sacrosanct. Absolutely best practice. Whether best practice is followed in organizations, regardless of their size, let alone um, multi-jurisdictional enterprises, and then again, nation states, maybe, maybe.
All right. So moving on. Uh,
Okay.
Storytelling has always been at the heart of your work, from what I've read. And you wrote your first letter to the editor at the age of 6. So, conducting in depth interviews with hundreds of the world. I mean, you named some people. I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And you've been using words to drive change, spark ideas, connect people, all of those kind of things. And that, so what was the, and you mentioned a little bit about all the interviews that you had done that came up with this book. Was there another type of a thing? Was there any particular event, or was it just like you were thinking about it a long time and then just said, it's time to do it now?
No, not at all. Not at all. I had moved to Amsterdam, didn't speak any Dutch at all, needed to get a job, and opened a newspaper, and there was an ad for a proofreader. And I thought, well, I can do that. And I should back up and say I am a yes person. If can you do that? Sure. Why not? How hard could it be? And I've said that throughout my life. So the job was for a proofreader. I went for the interview about half an hour before my interview started. Their arts and culture editor had quit, and this was for a startup expat newspaper. It was the only English language focused newspaper in the entire country. So, and they were panicking. They had to go to print that week. So they just said to me, do you think you could be arts and culture editor? And I said, sure. How hard could it be? You know, I, I read, I like the arts. I was in theater for, why not? So I literally just said yes. And then this world opened up to me. And it really was, for instance, because it was very much focused on the expat community. If you were an international artist, or a musician, an author, a filmmaker, or you had any kind of story, passion, or project that you wanted to communicate to this fairly wealthy community, I would suggest. Expats generally have readies to hand, if you will, as they say in the UK. So if you wanted to access that community, all of a sudden you came to me, and it was astonishing. I literally, heroes of mine. When Tom Wolfe walked in the door for me to interview him, and he was in his white suit, man, I got chills. He was, and his whole thing about, hey, Miss Kim, and I mean, I melted. The man was probably in his 80s, and I was his, boom, I was in. Sitting down with John Irving and sharing secrets, if you will. One of the things that I found very early on is, if I told a secret about myself first, it was much more likely that I would get a secret back. The Madeleine Albright one was really massive for me, though. First of all, Madeleine Albright, right? Like, oh my goodness, I really could not believe I was sitting, not just sitting across from this woman, but she kicked off her shoes, tucked her feet up on the couch, and sort of said, "Okay." And I just thought, you are such a chick, I mean, wow, this is not some stuffy, constricted kind of conversation that's going to be happening here. This was flowing. And then this may be my proudest moment in that career that I had, was her PR person came in, as they do. I mean, normally you have 15 minutes, 20 minutes is really great, because they're pushing press through. And the PR person came in and kind of did the wrap up sign, and Madeline turned around and looked and she said, "Oh no, I'm enjoying this one. We'll let it go." I just thought, I'm good. I'm done. You know what? If I was going to retire, I would retire on that one. So it was very much a surprise, another bend in that convoluted journey, but it really opened up so many doors because then when I moved to Australia, and I wasn't 20, blonde, and with a particular last name in Australian media. So I knew I wasn't going to walk into this kind of career here. And I had to figure out, what am I going to be doing? Well, the code whisperer was writing code. And I thought, well, what I could do maybe is start a blog. And I wanted to write about innovation and innovators, specifically because the innovators that I had met in the lead up to this were not necessarily great storytellers. And I felt that it was really when the time of influencers and yeah, let's just say it was probably possibly the beginning of the Kardashian era. And my thinking was, when I retire, the Kardashians are not going to be any use to me at all. So I don't need everybody to be an influencer. I need y'all to be looking at being an innovator and doing things that are going to actually enhance society, that lift us all up. Though, like, Spanx has a lift. No shade, no shade. But I thought, well, what I am really good at is helping people to tell their stories. So I wanted to go to these innovators and say, and I did not have a national platform anymore. I had this little blog that I was just starting. So I went and addressed them and said, could I interview you for this? Generally speaking, it's very hard to get through certain gatekeepers, let alone to then get a yes once you're past the gatekeeper. But because I was able to say things like, well, I did interview Madeleine Albright and
Yeah,
I got probably 90% yeses of the invitations to be interviewed that I sent out. So that blog then turned into my first book, which turned into my second
okay.
book. So that's really how this all came about. Was, again, just like I said, a meandering course of, how hard could it be?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're going to get into some of those things for, tips for some of the people that are, wanting to raise capital or growing their companies, because, founders are constantly communicating, whether it's hiring or pitching or dealing with investors, but most don't think of themselves as interviewers or even storytellers, right? I
For sure.
think particularly that you mentioned the tech guys or tech innovators so often, which is one of the reasons why they don't answer questions the way, directly, is because they're so focused on just the tech, and they don't really can't really put it into a mechanism of a story that can be understood. And when I was with at IBM, one of my secret sauces, if you will, it was that I was a tech whisperer, in that I would be the one that would actually translate what the tech guy said so that the people in the audience would actually understand what that meant through a story, usually.
Yeah.
So why should they figure out how to master that?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer your question for sure. It was a great question. Thank you for that. But I first want to say, I was also on the board of a university in Australia, Griffith University, for over a decade, and because how hard could it be? And I used to get parents ask me, understandably, "Wow, you're in the university system. What should my child be studying?" And I would say to them very honestly, the way things are moving, it's in that 4-year period, I can't tell you what's going to happen. I could suggest that probably, being a computer analyst may not be the best thing because there is technology coming that might shift them out of a job. I would say the same thing about, data analysis. But if you are a person that can speak multiple languages, in that, can you speak tech? Can you speak C-suite? Can you speak business? Can you speak end user? If you are that translator, you are likely to be one of the most powerful people at the table because everybody is going to rely on you. So I to be that whisperer was a really, really important and strategic place to be. So kudos to you
Yeah,
for
thank you.
for doing that. Back to your question. Yes, interviewing. Look, to my mind, every interaction is essentially a form of an interview, whether you're hiring and interviewing candidates, whether you're pitching, you're fielding questions from investors. If you're leading a team, hopefully you're drawing out insights and making strategic decisions based on what you hear. So what the interviewer's guidebook does is it kind of breaks down how to ask better questions, actively listen, and then get the insights that will help you drive better decisions. And it's not about having scripted questions or rigid structures. It's really about mastering the art of reading the room, reading people, and communicating in a way that builds trust. And we could dive in. We could talk for hours about the specifics about things, but I think for particularly if we talk about founders, sometimes founders just aren't great at explaining their business. And investors, employees, and customers, they're not just buying into your product, they're buying into the founder's vision. So sometimes founders forget that a great pitch isn't just, a slide deck and a data dump of numbers and projections. It's about storytelling. It's about making their audience see why their business matters, how it solves a real problem, and pardon me, and why they're the right person to lead it. So in the book, I talk about how the best interviewers use storytelling and analogies to make complex ideas accessible, because that's exactly what founders have to do. They
Yeah.
have to be able to translate technical concepts into a compelling human-centered narrative. And in fact, I was doing that a couple of days ago. It was a couple of nights ago, actually. I was hosting an event on, funnily enough, the geopolitics of cybersecurity. So if you're talking to non-technical people, which again is probably 99% of the global population, really, you have to speak in their language, and you have to root technical concepts in the things that they already understand. So instead of, for example, diving into jargon about how cybersecurity has evolved exponentially in the digital age, I just used a simple analogy. I said, remember when you could hide a key to your front door under the doormat, or in one of those hide a rock thingies? And even if you don't remember it, because you probably are
Yeah.
younger than
No, I
me,
have a hide rock. Yeah.
right? You've seen it in old school TV shows and
No,
movies. So,
I still have a hide rock.
okay, well, you shouldn't. That worked back then, okay? But today, most people wouldn't dream of that. The way we secure our homes has changed because the risks have changed, and it is the same with cybersecurity. The way we protect our data and our digital identity and assets has to evolve too, because what kept us safe in the past doesn't cut it anymore. So, Karen, get your key out of that rock.
So yeah, so I see you got telling a story about how cybersecurity has changed. So any
And
tips for
bringing
those
it to
technical
your house,
founders? I'm sorry.
and bringing it to your house specifically.
Yeah. So um, I don't have a digital door, so I have to use a key. So that's,
I understand. You don't have
so
to put the key in the
you would never figure out what rock it is. Trust me on that.
Fair enough.
So for for those technical founders that you were talking about that have it, like you were given that example, got any specific tips, one or two, three things that might be takeaways for founders listening right now? And then on the other side, I always try to put the hat on of how an investor that's looking at companies would understand that a founder that it can't get out of the jargon, it isn't bad because they're likely going to be a part of a team, and but that's part of, you can love them for where they're at versus where they will grow into. So for people listening right now, any tips on like how do you understand that other people don't really understand what you're saying?
Sure, sure. Look, we see this all the time, right? Founders who are absolutely brilliant at building something, but they kind of struggle to explain it in a way that investors or customers or sometimes even their own team can understand. So I guess if I was going to say the gold star for me of tips is the biggest mistake is assuming that people already get it. You could call it the curse of knowledge, where you know something so well, you're so close to it that you kind of forget how to break it down for somebody who doesn't live it and breathe it like you do. So the book teaches ways to avoid that, like using analogies, again, real world examples, and simple language to translate technical concepts into something relatable. And the templates that you mentioned that people can access from the link that you have so graciously shared, those will help in crafting the way founders and tech heads can explain their product in a way that a non-technical person understands, so that they have an easier time of selling it. I would suggest that that's probably the best tip I can tell you, as use a template. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in preparing, right? A big part of it is preparing in advance, and having. I tell people, like when I'm helping them with their creating their pitch or delivering their pitch, it's like you've got to practice this, and you've got to practice it with somebody that doesn't really know what you're doing. You know
For
what I mean?
sure.
They might know a little bit, but they're not the same level of knowledge of the inner workings of your business or your technology. So that if they don't understand, like first you start practicing on your dog, and a dog, of course, doesn't understand, but you get your cadence and your kind of thing like that going.
Right.
And then you sit down your 10-year-old on the couch, and I'm going to deliver this presentation to you, and then when it's done, tell me what if you understood it on a scale of whatever and what questions you might have, right? And so that's a
Absolutely.
big part of preparing. I have this one client I've been working with that he cannot answer the question directly, and he cannot get out of his jargon. Every chart's got jargon, everything like that, and I keep trying to tell him, like, talk about the solution and how it would be applied and tell a story. And so just this interview right here, I figured out better techniques for him, and of course he's going to have to go get your book, but better techniques for him to be better at doing that. And he's gotten better over me constantly saying, stop, like just stop right there. That's not the answer to the question. Let me rephrase the question.
For
So,
sure.
and sometimes when I'm talking to people and they give me a completely different answer, I don't want to blame it on them. Like they didn't, I'll say, oh, you didn't really, I wasn't clear on what I was asking you about. So let me rephrase the question, right? That's the way I'll do that sometimes. So,
Yeah.
how, one of the things is, so it kind of happens, sometimes, and this was one of your questions, but I didn't really understand it as an interview skill. But people are, when you're building a team, when you're in negotiations, right? When you're doing these different kind of things, sometimes it's difficult in these situations, and you got different personalities that you're dealing with. So, whether it's a tough employee or an investor negotiation or whatever, what are some interview techniques that might help with navigating this uncharted territory?
Well, again, I'm going to take you back to the templates because it actually takes you through the life cycle, if you will. So there's a preparation checklist, and essentially that covers all the essential pre-interview tasks that even from research to equipment checks. Next, there's the interview outline checklist that looks at helping you to pardon me, plan key questions and also kind of maintain a smooth conversational flow. You go through how to take notes, and that essentially is one of the unsung heroes of effective interviews. But whether you're interviewing or being interviewed, we go through the follow up. I've got question banks that give some pretty good balancing technical question ideas, problem solving assessments. There's feedback templates, interview prep templates, recruitment interview scoring matrices, or matrixy, personal reflection, even journals for interviewers. So this is a life cycle, and I don't necessarily think that there is. Oh gosh, I should say there's no one thing that you can do that is going to solve all of this for you. I think that it is a process. However, I will say startups and founders, if you will, they live and die on relationships, whether it's a relationship with your investor, your customer, your partner, or your employee. At the heart of every strong relationship is trust, understanding, and compassion. So if you don't know how to communicate effectively, it's going to be tough to build credibility or inspire confidence in your vision. And one of the most overlooked skills in leadership, be it being a founder or otherwise, but especially in fast moving startups, is active listening. So most people assume that the great communicators are ones who speak well, but actually the best communicators are the ones who listen well. And they're picking up on what's not being said. They might notice hesitation or underlying concerns. In an investor meeting, if you're truly listening and not just waiting for your turn to talk, which is something that so many people do, you're going to pick up on what the investor actually cares about. And that means you can respond with empathy, you can address their real concerns, and frame your message in a way that resonates. Now, to that end, speaking of preparation, so for instance, when I am being interviewed, I assume that interviewers, such as you so extraordinarily did, obviously, given that amazing lead in, the interviewer, the interviewer will have done their research and they're ready for me. But I have also done my research on the interviewer. I know what they're particularly interested in. I know what their audience is particularly interested in. I know how their flow tends to go. I know where they tend to put emphasis because every single interviewer and every show is different. So if I want to have essentially the best time, the most fun, and make the most effective use of my time there, I really should have done some prep work. So that's, I think, it's not just the interviewer and it's not just the interviewee who needs to prep. Everybody needs to be ready for this. If you're going into an investor meeting, you better have done some research on on what they're looking for and what excites them. Great communication, like I say, it's not just about what you say. It's about what you notice, it's how you respond, and it's how you make the other person feel. And that is where compassion makes all the difference to my mind.
Yeah, yeah, and I think one thing that I know within some of my interpersonal relationships, sometimes the people that you're closest to, you make assumptions about why they say what they say or why they ask what they ask or the way they ask it. And that causes a reaction that may or may not be what they were saying or asking at all. So I try to adopt, and I don't do it as well personally, but in public settings and professional, it's ask before you assume, right? So you say,
Right.
is that what you're asking, or is this what or you think something I had even when I'm writing. I've had to, when I think somebody hasn't done something, they haven't completed something, it's an employee that hasn't completed something or hadn't done something, instead of saying, you didn't do this, how come you didn't do this? It would say, I have to ask the question is where I don't see where it is it someplace else?
Yeah.
You
Tough
know,
conversations are that, aren't they? They're hard to have, particularly if they're high stakes. So, I mean, whether it's handling a tough conversation with an employee or handling a PR crisis or negotiating funding, how you communicate in the moments can be they can really define your leadership. So, I do cover this in the book, but for instance, in an investor pitch, if someone throws a curveball question and you're not sure about it and you don't want to panic, you don't want to get defensive, what you could do, for instance, is use a redirecting technique. So you acknowledge their concern, you reframe the conversation, and then steer it back to your strengths. Or if you're dealing with a tough employee situation, the book would teach you how to structure a conversation that is productive rather than confrontational. So, to my mind, whether you're in a boardroom, an investor meeting, or a media interview, um, knowing how to ask the right questions, stay on message, and control the tone can make all the difference.
yeah. Okay, everybody. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to give Kim a chance to any golden nuggets that she didn't get a chance to talk about. The book again is an interviewer's guidebook to turning conversations into captivating stories. The full link is in the show notes, but you can go get information about our company, Three Steps Data. So that's three, the number three, stepsdata.com, and then interviewguidebook.com. So the simple, not the full name of the book, interview guidebook, which is like, I'm amazing that you got that domain because that seems like a
I
pretty
know.
straightforward domain. So
Pretty much a no-brainer, right?
yeah.
Couldn't believe it.
All right. So, and there's also
So
a link in there. It's her Blink card that you can see where her follow up, her LinkedIn, and I think even schedule an appointment with her. So, okay. So, what did we not
wrap it
cover
up.
that you were going like?
Oh
You're like,
gosh.
oh, I wish you'd asked me this. Oh, I meant to say that. Whatever. Anything?
I think we've journeyed. It's been a really full conversation. If I was going to underline a few things, though, I would say there are some key things. Great conversations are the foundation of great business. Whether you're hiring, pitching, or leading a team, your ability to listen, engage, and communicate effectively is what will set you apart. So, if you can ask the right questions and get the real insights and tell your story in a way that resonates, you're going to be unstoppable. And a big part of that is, as I mentioned before, it's being multilingual, not in the traditional sense, but in how you adapt your language to your audience. So, whether you're speaking to investors, board members, the C suite, tech teams, or the general public, your message really is only going to land if they truly understand it. And I would just end with this: the best communicators know how to bridge worlds. They can translate complex technical ideas into investor ready insights. They turn high level strategy into something that is actionable for their teams, and they make every listener feel like the message was meant for them. And if you can do that, if you can speak in a language that resonates with your audience, you will always have a seat at the table. And more importantly, you'll be invited back to speak and tell your story.
Very good. Thank you, Kim Chandler McDonald, for being a guest on the Compassionate Capitalist Show. Everybody, please share this with your friends and your family and all those people that you know need to communicate better. And we'll say onwards and upwards,
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for the great questions and the great conversation.
always. Okay, so it's going to say, let's see, you are at